Welcome to The Disruptive Disciple, the podcast where we somehow manage to offend the exact same kinds of people Jesus offended, and somehow we still can sleep okay at night. Hey, I'm Pastor Brandon, and sitting across from me, my wife, my partner in disruption, and the woman who sees the chaos of my ministry unfold in real time, Shay. So welcome, Shay.
Hi, everyone. This is fun. I get to kick off this whole thing by interviewing Brandon, which honestly feels fair because people ask half the questions online. I ask at home. If you're joining us from Facebook, welcome. If you landed here by accident, also welcome. Stick around. Sometimes Brandon grows on people slowly, like moss.
So yeah, welcome to whatever this is. We may suck at this until we get the hang of it. And wait, Shay, can I say suck on a Christian podcast?
Well, you just did.
Oh boy. Okay, so I guess we're breaking boundaries already. Anyway, we are here in the studio on the Arizona State University campus, and I gotta say, Shay, the studio is really nice, and I don't feel worthy to be in it yet.
Neither do I. But for those listening, give us grace, stick with us, and we'll see where this thing goes.
Yeah, and if it turns out badly, it can just be a cautionary tale, right? For others who are starting a podcast and flying by the seat of their pants while they do it. So if this turns out bad, maybe we'll just be an amazing example of what not to do.
Okay, Brandon. Someone clicks the podcast cover and thinks, who is this guy and why is he disruptive? Start there.
Yeah, well, first, I really do pray that people hear God's heart more than my opinions. Nobody needs to hear from me. I don't even want to hear from me most of the time. So about me, I followed Jesus for now over 40 years. I grew up at North Phoenix Baptist Church in Phoenix under Pastor Richard Jackson. And back in the 80s, Shay, wow, church wasn't something you went to, it was something you lived in.
You were at church a lot growing up.
Yeah, it was crazy. There was Sunday school, Sunday morning service after that, maybe a trip to Bob's Big Boy before we come back, and then it's Sunday evening service. Then we had Wednesday night service and youth group and church sports leagues and choir tours and Christmas service plays and performances and Easter service plays and summer camps and outreach, and I'm probably not even listing them all, but let's just say that if North Phoenix Baptist Church had a loyalty punch card back in 1983, I would have earned a Baptist Letterman jacket by age 12, like varsity level church participation. That drive to church every Sunday morning, I'll always remember. My parents had Focus on the Family and James Dobson on full volume. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in the back seat. I'll be back there with my yellow Sony Walkman, secretly flipping to Casey Kasem's Top 40. You remember that, Shade, the Casey Kasem on Sunday mornings?
Oh, yeah. Finger hovered over the record button, praying no one in my house made a sound.
Right. And if, for instance, if Whitney Houston beat out Def Leppard for number one, 14-year-old me had some real feelings about that. The reason I'm telling you that is inside the church, I lived in a youth group. I listened to contemporary Christian music, Petra, Steve Taylor, Michael W. Smith. I was fully immersed in the church in every way a believer could be. But outside the church, I lived in 80s music and MTV and the John Hughes movie culture. And this tension was visible on my teenage bedroom walls. I remember, Shay, and I've shared this with you before, just in my room, I had Stryper and Amy Grant posters literally right next to AC/DC and Madonna posters. So Baptist Brandon was conflicted.
Didn't that conflict land you in a weekend seminar about you listening to the devil music?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's one of my favorite memories of my Christian adolescence. So in high school, bless her heart, my mom sent me to a 2-day rock and roll rehab conference, and it was led by a guy. I don't know why I remember this. His name was Mike Adams. And I sat there all weekend. I think it was 8 hours a day. While he played albums, he played the Eagles, he played AC/DC, he played Ozzy Osbourne, backwards, forwards, and all it did was just introduce me to new music. And honestly, I'm embarrassed to admit this. I never heard Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, until I attended this Christian rock and roll rehab where he introduced me to Led Zeppelin. I heard that song forward and backwards so many times during that seminar that I began to love it. So I appreciate the heart behind it, but that was not money well spent there. So sorry, Mom.
You mentioned having posters of Stryper and AC/DC on your walls as a teen, and that tension between secular, mainstream music and Christian music still lives strong in your adulthood. It makes me think of the Queensryche story, a clash of your Christian and secular music colliding in all the best ways. Tell that story.
Okay, I'm having a moment of first podcast self-awareness. I wonder what our listeners are thinking right now, Shay, because they came here to a Pastor Brandon Christian podcast, and we're not even 10 minutes in, and we just talked about Led Zeppelin, and now the follow-up is a Queensryche story. This is actually pretty amazing. So, okay, Queensryche story. Roughly 5 or 6 years ago, Shay and I, we go to see Queensryche, which was one of my favorite bands, and the couple we're with, who is an amazing couple, church friends of ours, says, oh, by the way, meet our friend Tim Gaines. Well, Tim Gaines is the bassist from Stryper. This is a guy whose poster was literally taped to my wall as a kid. And we sat there together at the concert and we talked for a bit and rocked out together to some Queensryche songs with Tim freaking Gaines. And that was so surreal. And just by getting to know him a little, I began admiring him for more who he is and not the band he played for.
His wife was lovely too. But quick question, is this how every episode is going to go? I ask a question and you disappear into an 80s music monologue?
Only if you let me. And I believe that you, Shay, brought up the Queensryche thing.
Fair enough. So back to the question, who are you?
Well, some people call me the space cowboy. Some call me the gangster of love. You know that some people even call me Maurice? Steve Miller Band, 1985, 86. I don't know.
No. Now answer the question.
Shay, I'm just a guy who loves Jesus, has very little patience for nonsense, and somehow, some way, became the founder of a ministry I never planned for and I never asked for. I never set out to build a platform. The last thing I want to be is an influencer. I'm just more comfortable being the pastor in the background, having those meaningful one-on-one conversations rather than a pastor peacocking in front of big audiences and looking for attention. I just started this whole thing just to talk about Jesus and what it looks like to follow him in today's upside down, crazy world. I don't claim to be the ultimate authority. I just want others to wrestle and to think about the same things that I think about and wrestle with in our faith. And it turns out that people were really hungry for something real, for these honest conversations. And they found their way here. They found their way part of this community.
I've watched your audience grow from just a couple thousand to what it is now. And you seem to work just as hard on this ministry when you were talking to 50 people as when you now get 50 million views on Facebook.
Yeah, the growth of my social media is humbling. It's sometimes intimidating, other times terrifying. And you see where I struggle with that imposter syndrome. And you see when sometimes I don't want this, any of it. But this is all God. It's not about me. I didn't do this. I'm not that talented. I'm really the guy in the background who says, hey, God, there are better people for the job, people more talented, more eloquent, more hair. and you know, as that saying goes, as cheesy as it is, there's truth in it. I think it's God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. So the only thing I think I'm doing just on my own is just saying yes, just leaning into this, whatever this is. You know, since the other more talented, more camera-ready pastors aren't doing it, I guess God scraped the bottom of the pastoral barrel and found me, a willing yet completely unworthy volunteer for something like this. So honestly, I'm just trying to let the Holy Spirit guide my thoughts and words and just trust in that.
It took you 2 years to put your face and name on this ministry. Why?
Yeah, I called this ministry something else at first because I really never wanted the ministry to become about me. But we all know that people connect with people. They connect with a person better than a ministry or a logo or a brand. But I resisted that. I wanted my anonymity. I can't say that, but you know what I mean. And,
Yeah.
I preferred to be anonymous. We'll say it in a much easier way to say it. And I resisted that for about 2 years.
And why only Pastor Brandon, not your full name?
Primarily just accessibility and part of it's safety. Not everyone loves what I say. Some take their disapproval of me, I would say, to unsettling places sometimes. So keeping my last name off the front end was just one small layer of protection. But also, Pastor Brandon just felt more personable. It felt approachable. That's what, when I was a church pastor, people often just, called me, and it just felt very intimate in an endearing way. So this ministry for me has always been that. It has always been deeply personal. And Shay, I think you saw that almost every day that you were a church pastor's wife with me. My focus was just really trying to walk with people in their joy, walk with them in their hurts, their doubts, and just being faithful when we don't have the answers, and just knowing that people have someone in their corner.
I remember those late middle of the night crisis calls.
Yeah, and there were a lot of them, and I have to say I am grateful, honestly grateful for every one of them. Grateful and honored that I got to be someone God used to try to help someone else in their story.
You already have a big community on Facebook. I see how hard you work. Why start a podcast?
Okay, confession. I did not want to start a podcast. But I really don't like doing videos, like reels and video sermons, like, ugh, yuck.
Why are you opposed to videos?
Well, years working in a church and years in church culture convinced me, probably unfairly, that the guys with the trendiest aesthetics got the microphone. The pastors who resonate with that coveted young adult and family demographic that most churches target more than anyone else. And I just wasn't that guy. I always looked weird in skinny jeans, a beanie, and wearing a denim jacket when it's 110 degrees outside. It's Phoenix. So yeah, I was that bald, middle-aged, non-market aligned pastor in the background, just trying to do the hard personal one-on-one ministry stuff while the others were called to do the stage more often. And truth be told, I liked it that way. Don't get me wrong. I loved my stage time, but I really didn't need it. But Shay, to answer your question, do you remember my first couple of years as a pastor when I had to record those video sermons and then they'd be played at all the weekend services across all the campuses in the Valley?
I do. And if I remember it correctly, you were stressed out every time you had to do one. You'd rehearse in our walk-in closet for hours.
Yeah, like it was extremely stressful for me. But there's a reason. So first, the video messages, they were 12 to 15 minutes long. But the big thing is that we had to memorize our scripts, and God did not grant me the gift of memorization. I really think my memory capacity hit full back in about 1990, and it's only full of like useless stuff like song lyrics and movie quotes. But, I can tell you, Shay, every word to a Beastie Boys album, but memorizing anything else has really honestly been very hard for me. And 12 to 15 minutes of content memorized, that was just a lot.
But I've seen you speak in front of large and small audiences, and I always thought you did well. You seem to draw energy from an audience.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, you didn't have to record those videos alone.
I was in a small room with another pastor who worked the camera, sound, and the lighting. So I'm in a dark room, lights blaring in my face, no crowd, no notes to refer to, only the whites of two little eyeballs looking at me over the camera through the darkness. And Shay, those videos sucked. I cringe if I had to watch any of them again.
I saw all of them. They were fine.
Maybe I can, you know what? I have an idea. Maybe I can contact my former church and I can ask them if I can buy those originals just to keep them silenced forever, because nobody needs to see that again. Didn't Tom Hanks do that? I heard a rumor that Tom Hanks, he bought the Bosom Buddies sitcom series just to keep it from airing again.
No, that's an urban legend. I loved that show, Bosom Buddies. Tom Hanks in all his permish glory.
I watched that show every time it was on, and men dressing up as women, and strangely enough, it didn't groom me to be transgender. So maybe that's not how all of this works.
Hey, pump the brakes. It's only episode 1. We can't be going nuclear with the subject matter already.
Okay, so Shay, not only as my co-host, but as the producer of this podcast, are you telling me that episode 2 can't be about abortion? Come on, let's turn this merry-go-round on full blast and start talking about the hard stuff that most churches and people really don't dare talk about.
Well, you have me talking about Queensryche, Stryper, the Beastie Boys, and Tom Hanks wearing a bra. So, as your producer, I can't guarantee what we'll be talking about in future episodes.
Right.
But you just used a merry-go-round metaphor. I've heard you use that in another context, and I think it's worth talking about right now. Last month, you posted about a former lead pastor at a church you worked at using a merry-go-round metaphor. Can you talk about that without an 80s pop culture reference?
You're right. That would actually be a really good quick story to tell right now, and it fits in really with what this episode is supposed to be all about anyway. So look at you doing some impressive, crazy, mad producing. You were like the Dr. Dre of producing. You're Dr. Shay. It's Shay Day. So
Okay, fail. You've already started with a Gen X reference.
well, in fairness, I think that was entrapment. But anyway, the merry-go-round story. When I was a pastor at a large multi-site church, I attended a lead team retreat at the lead pastor's cabin. And I think this was 2022, like early 2022-ish. And I remember our group, we sat around and together and we watched a video from, I believe it was T.D. Jakes, about critical race theory. And it was an amazing sermon, just so well thought out and full of knowledge. And afterwards, all of us discussed that. All of the pastors, we just got together and we had a very honest discussion. And during that conversation, the lead pastor said something that sounded completely reasonable at the moment. He said nothing alarming, nothing outrageous, but as it marinated in my brain over the course of days, weeks, months, it just started to eat at me. He used this merry-go-round analogy. And while I'm paraphrasing, what he said when it comes to speaking clearly and directly about those controversial topics, especially those topics tangled up in misinformation and politics and polarization, the lead pastor, felt like he needed to keep the merry-go-round of his messages spinning slowly. And he used that analogy or a metaphor or whatever it is. I'm not sure which one it is, and we're talking at a college, so I feel like I should know the difference right now. But he used this merry-go-round analogy, and he said, keep it low key, because if you crank up the merry-go-round too fast and speak too directly, people are going to get thrown off the ride. And that merry-go-round reference just kept spinning, pardon the pun, in my head for weeks. And what I ended up interpreting this as, what I heard from him, was a message of, if we say what really needs to be said, not softened, not filtered, not lukewarm, we'll lose members. And if we lose members, we lose donations. And if we lose donations, we lose jobs. And coming fresh off 2 years of, I would call it, pastoral combat duty during the COVID years, that mentality within the church, that fearful mentality of, we can't afford to lose people or we'll have to shut church doors, fear had already put a lot of pastors into survival mode. And suddenly, just protecting the institution started to compete with preaching a clear, direct, and necessary and challenging gospel message in the exact season in history, or at least the history of my life, where it's needed to be said clearly more than ever. And that's when I saw how churches, even well-intentioned churches, as mine was, can slowly become operational monsters that have to be fed. Payroll has to be met, buildings have to be maintained, debt has to be serviced. That machine has to keep running, and good intentions or not, the mission begins to slip, it begins to shift. So the messages from the pulpit were carefully calibrated to avoid losing members, and yes, I'm going to say it, and they're calibrated not to lose primarily MAGA members. That was the real shift in mission and message that I saw after COVID. Just a fear crept in, a be careful what you say culture. And that wasn't the church I joined. It wasn't the ministry mission I signed up for. When I first came on staff, I watched that lead pastor from the pulpit just challenge whoever needed challenging. And he'd say it boldly, grounded in gospel truth, fully aware that he would wake up to 100 emails on Monday morning, and he just didn't care. And it's not the only church. It's not just my church. I've heard this from other pastors, but COVID did something to us, and it reduced many pastors' courage just to say the things that need to be said. Not all the pastors, but many of them. Because the reality is churches have overhead. They have debt, they have payroll, electric bills. And that's when that consumer Christianity kind of sneaks in. But the punchline to that whole merry-go-round story, Shay, is behind closed doors. I had a discussion with this lead pastor and I asked him directly, what do you see as the biggest threat to American Christianity in the church? And there was no hesitation. He looked at me and he said, Brandon, it's Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is not about Jesus. It's not about Christianity. It's about power and everything that Jesus was against. And you know what? That was a great answer. It was an honest answer. I respected him for it, but he'd never say that in front of a paying ticket holder on the church merry-go-round that he created. And I just couldn't get over that.
I wanted you to tell that story because look at the contrast. You're talking about the very topics that the church told you to stay away from. And you reached, I suspect, more people than that whole multi-site church reached last year. I doubt their messages reached 50 million people.
Yeah.
And you did it by yourself. No payroll, just a guy, a calling, a keyboard, and a message.
Yeah, but as I said, it's not about me. This ministry has been successful. The ministry has, not me.
I don't bring that up just to brag on my husband. The reason I bring that up is this. Are churches too worried about who will walk out the doors if they preach unfiltered, unpolitical Jesus while not thinking about the people this message will attract?
Shay, preach. You can't see me, but I'm throwing my hands in the air. Yes, absolutely. Like, preach that. Like, really from my heart. Like, I truly believe every church pew would be filled if churches stood up to the evangelical right and the forces that have hijacked, that have redefined, rebranded, and just weaponized Christianity. So yes, absolutely. If we truly loved like Jesus, instead of trying to figure out biblical ways not to, wow, the church would be increasing its membership instead of decreasing it. The trends would change immediately. And I do see the trends changing a bit, and I see those great Jesus-centric churches out there. There are some great churches here in the Valley, in the Phoenix area, that do just that. They love Jesus. They love people. They're diverse, amazing, and loving.
You've been nervous about this podcast. I've seen it.
Yeah.
So how do you think it's going so far?
Well, it's part nerves right now, part the caffeine from the Diet Dr. Pepper that I downed before I came in the studio. But honestly, the biggest thing here, Shay, is I don't want to waste people's time. And yes, you and I are perfectionists in the most exhausting way sometimes.
So the bar is don't suck.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's basically all we can do. If we can step over that bar, it's a success. But really, I just kept feeling a nudge to do this, which I couldn't shake. And God rarely calls us into comfort. So I'll just say yes and see what happens here.
Like your Noah story.
Yep. God gave Noah every detail about the ark. In the Bible, it talks about Noah had the exact dimensions, the wood types, just very specific, like IKEA level instructions, but I guess that's a poor example, probably well better than IKEA level. But in spite of all of those directions, one thing was missing from those instructions, and that was a rudder. Noah wasn't meant to steer the boat. He wasn't given a rudder. So this podcast, so far, Shay, I feel it's kind of a rudderless ark. I'm building what God asked me to build, letting him steer it and letting him keep it afloat.
When did you first feel called to this kind of ministry?
Oh, long before I was a pastor. I grew up in a Christianity that said to church outsiders, come as you are. But somewhere along the way, that Christian posture became more of a come as we expect you to be. And Christianity became less about Jesus and more about Christians demanding that others meet their personal definition, I guess, of what they think a Christian looks like. And over the decades, I've just watched Christianity drift, just slowly and quietly until it carried Jesus's name, really. But really, I just don't see his heart in a lot of those Christian circles. So the religious right fused Christianity with political power. Voting blocks replaced discipleship in some instances. And sadly, and it breaks my heart, like Jesus has become a mascot for agendas that he never endorsed.
And reading that book, Jesus and John Wayne, was like someone turning the lights on for you.
Exactly. That, Shay, is referring to a book called Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobes Dumais. I know I'm completely butchering her name, and I apologize if you're listening to this, but Kristen, the author, actually dropped into my Facebook page comments last summer, so it was really great to get to tell her directly how impactful her book is, not only to me, but to thousands of others. And this book is basically, how would I put it, a historical, this sounds weird, but a historical autopsy, basically kind of naming what many of us saw and lived through during our faith but couldn't articulate. How forces back in the 1980s and 90s, and I guess before that, how forces like Jimmy Swaggart and Pat Robertson and James Dobson and other prominent religious leaders joining forces, and they became a political force. Even in the late 80s, I started hearing this sentiment of, if you're a Christian, you're a Republican, which never sat right with me, really. And then came the internet and the echo chambers and the weaponized outrage and, the Fox News issue, whose anchors admitted in court under oath that their primetime content was meant to be entertainment, not journalism. And all of these forces came together, and suddenly now the loudest Christians seem to be the angriest Christians. And then came 2016, and no, I'm not going to blame this all on you-know-who. Trump and MAGA didn't create this dysfunction. I believe they revealed it. He's the pimple, the infection that was really already spreading underneath.
Lovely imagery.
Well, Jesus used imagery like weeds and soil. I guess I use dermatology references. But what I wanted to say, Shay, regarding Trump is I really wanted to say, he didn't start the fire. But I figure you're done with my 80s, song references. So shout out to Billy Joel. Anyway, but during my pastor years at a large multi-site church, leaders knew, we talked about it. They knew Christian nationalism was poison, but they wouldn't speak against it publicly. Not because they lacked conviction, but because they feared losing people. And losing people meant losing funding. And losing funding meant losing your job. And that's a really scary tension to be in. And just that forced silence, it burned me out. And it burned out other pastors too, and they left. And one of the only parts that felt like real ministry was when I was leading the benevolence ministry. Getting to sit down with people facing eviction and hunger and despair, and being able to help them, to give them a check, to make sure that they have a meal and a place to sleep tonight. Just being his hands and feet, not just I felt like a cog in a church operational model. So leaving the church operational structure gave me freedom. So I just started writing online just about Jesus, the real Jesus, not the political mascot, not the one who's defined by abortion and LGBTQ plus talking points, no denominational baggage, and people, they just started showing up, and thousands of them from every walk of life. And I realized that this wasn't an accident. It was just me saying yes and God just doing the rest.
So what's the mission?
Easy: to make Christianity about Jesus again. Not politics, not culture wars, not outrage cycles, just Jesus. Because everything hangs on loving God and loving others. And Jesus said that, not me. Yet when I preach those two greatest commands that Jesus said, people call me woke, and some create the straw man argument that I'm pro-sin because I won't obsess over someone's sexuality, but I will talk about the sins of pride, of cruelty, of dishonesty, and the big one, idolatry inside the church. But you cannot love God and hate your neighbor. You cannot love God and support movements that harm your neighbor. Because if our faith doesn't change how we treat people, especially the least of these, we're not following Jesus. We're just performing religion. And I believe Jesus referred to those religious performers as whitewashed tombs.
Your community is incredibly diverse. Why do you think they're here?
Because they're not judged, because they're allowed to ask the hard questions and not feel bad about it, because they're loved and they're not shamed. And because, when we reached 50 million people last year, which is just ridiculous to me, the miracle wasn't the number, it was the people. Seemingly every background, every ethnicity, every identity, every orientation, political perspectives, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Jewish, even atheists, they're all sitting at the same table and we're discussing things and we're trying to love as best we can. So just this community here, we are proof that people don't need to agree on everything and be the same and have the same background to love each other well. And I just feel that that's Jesus. It has to be. I mean, it's not me doing this. There's no algorithm that can create that kind of community. I really think only love does.
People see the posts. They see some of the insults and even threats. Why keep going?
Yeah, I hear it a lot. Some say, there's no hate like Christian love, and I don't like that phrase because I'm a Christian, and it hurts me to hear that. But I understand why people say that, because most of the hate I get is not from atheists. It's not from other religions. It's from Christians. And it's from Christians who have this degree of certainty where they've accepted to not ever be challenged in their beliefs or wrestle with their faith. But honestly, like, the insults aren't the story in all of this. The threats, which I've got them, aren't the story in all of this. The stories are the story. And last year alone, I think it was over 3 million conversations happened on my page. And they weren't arguments, they were testimonies. And Shay, you've read them and I read them and they fill me up. And they're comments like, you know what, I thought God hated me, but I'm seeing this. Or my church rejected me, but I'm seeing the love of God here. I left Christianity, but I still love Jesus. How do I just be a believer in this world? And then, just comments like, your page helped me believe again. I mean, that gives me all the feels. So, that's why I do all of this. I get private messages sometimes, and I get private messages from LGBTQ people who were told by others, by Christians, by churches, that they are an abomination. But they somehow found love, and they found Jesus, and they found God again in this community. The people who walked away from faith because of Christians, not because of Christ. The people who are healing from those deep spiritual wounds that they never thought would close. Those voices, those stories, like what we hear, those drown out every insult, every threat, every accusation of being woke or progressive or a fake pastor, and all the litany of insults that I get every day. So this ministry really I'm seeing is for the outsider, and Jesus spent his time there, and I'm honored and blessed to do the same and spend my time there too. I've met some truly amazing people, people that the church and some Christians may point fingers at, people who, though, are so full of love that it's hard to see them as anything other than just God's beautiful creation. And that's just my favorite part of this.
So what can people expect here?
Yeah, honesty, truth without the theatrics, I guess I would say, and Jesus without the, how do I say this? Jesus without the religious or political additives. Genuineness over performance. We'll laugh. We'll talk about weird stuff, Beastie Boys references, stuff like that. We'll challenge each other. We'll push back on unhealthy religion and politics. And really what I hope is that we'll just invite people into something deeper than what we've been seeing. And what we've been seeing is a lot of performative Christianity.
And what about people who say you're causing division? Yeah,
I get that a lot. And sometimes I even kind of get it in more subtle ways from my friends, but they just kind of say it with a smile and more, Christian-y type of way. But, calling out idolatry doesn't create division. It reveals it. It reveals the division. And, I think about the golden calf. The golden calf didn't become holy just because people started worshiping it and bowing to it. And when the Israelites, they bowed to this false god, are those who rejected it and who spoke up against this false idol worship and they didn't bow, are they considered the dividers? Like, I can't reconcile that. It feels like they were the faithful ones. And I feel like that's where our ministry resides, even when it's unpopular. So many pastors, they stay silent, not not because they don't know the truth about all of this, but because they're afraid of losing their jobs. And consumer Christianity has disciplined them into caution. It reminds me, Beth Moore said it best, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said something like, 100 years from now, history will judge current American Christianity harshly. History is going to fault both the pastors who stayed silent during this time, but they're also going to fault the congregation who demanded their silence.
Pastors will either be convicted by this or send you an all caps email.
I've gotten those. Yeah, just earlier this month, I received an email from a pastor in the Midwest that ended with, and I don't believe it, but it ended with "go F yourself," and it didn't say F. Now that's just staying classy, right? So, it's why, Shay, sometimes I think grilling burgers at a men's ministry barbecue sometimes looks like a more appealing pastoral career for me, but disruption is the calling. And I guess if we're not upsetting the same types of people and systems that Jesus upset, we're probably not living by his gospel. So sometimes those all caps emails, as you mentioned, sometimes those are actually, strangely enough, the validation I need, that I haven't become lukewarm. In fact, I'm just saying this out loud now. If this podcast gets a 5-star rating, we failed in my eyes. Like, I don't want everyone to agree with me, to like everything I have to say. If people leave this podcast angry and convicted and blast me in the comments and give me 1 star, thank you. Because it means you're wrestling with something, and that has nothing to do with me. It's all about them and God. So I'm glad I was just able to introduce them into a spiritual wrestling match.
We're new to podcasting. This isn't fully comfortable for us yet.
No.
But I hope that as we do more of these, we get better at them.
Yeah, and honestly, we may suck at this for a bit. So I'm asking for grace. The real kind, and please don't judge this ministry by episode 1 or episode 2. Maybe try episode 7 when we get there, and we'll probably find our groove by then. And if that still misses the mark, I'm going to make sure that episode 8 will be about Jesus' command not to judge. So, I'll keep that little scriptural ace card in my back pocket if we need to.
By episode 7, you'll be completely out of random 80s pop culture references.
Never, because I'll just recycle the old ones. Right round like a record, baby. Right round, round, round.
If you're listening right now, pray for me, please. My job here is going to be more difficult than I imagined. So, Brandon, where can people find more?
Yeah, pastorbrandon.online. Everything lives there. But the real conversations happen on our Facebook page, and that's facebook.com/PastorBrandonAZ. And right now, Facebook is the ministry's core focus for me. I'm really just one contributor on that page. The real gift God has given us isn't me. Trust me, it's that comment section. It's really become that space where people can be honest, where we can wrestle with the hard stuff, and somehow just Christians, atheists, straight, gay, black, white, and everybody in between, we're all still showing up together. And what's wild about this is just beyond religion, race, orientation, beyond all the labels the world loves to hand out, most of us are actually uniting around love, and we're choosing to celebrate what we share more than what divides us. And it's like this beautifully diverse church small group discussion, except it's 70,000 people. And we're fighting for something. We're fighting for love. We're fighting against injustice, for feeding the poor, for protecting the abused, for welcoming the stranger, for loving our neighbor. And here's what I'm noticing, I hate saying this out loud, but I have to be honest, Shay, is a lot of atheists are more fired up about those values that I just mentioned than a disturbing number of hardcore church attending Christians, the kind who seem to define their faith more by who and what they're against than by who Jesus is for. And newsflash, Jesus, he's for everyone, even the people you're in a culture war with.
What's one thing you want listeners to know before they jump in?
That Jesus is better, far better than the version many of us were handed. Not weaponized Jesus, not politically red-hatted gun-loving, gay-bashing mascot Jesus, not clean yourself up first Jesus, but the real Jesus, the Jesus I've been following now for over 40 years, the one whom I've not only studied, but also experienced in my daily life, and the one who sits with the hurting, who welcomes the doubting, who restores the rejected, and confronts those who harm others in God's name. So if people are out there and they're looking at our country right now and they've said to themselves, hey, if this is Christianity, I'm not sure I want it. I get it. But what you saw, what you're seeing in the religious evangelical right, it just isn't him. And just my prayer is that somewhere in these conversations, when we wrestle with the hard stuff, when we stop defending religion and the political ideologies that have hijacked it, and start living and loving God and others through our actions, not our talking point, that experience, that's the Jesus who actually transforms lives, and all are welcome at his table. And if that were to happen, wow, Shay, this country would look a lot more like a, quote, Christian nation without ever needing to brand it, to legislate it, to weaponize it, to enforce it, because it would be centered in love. And God himself is love. 1 John 4:8, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Wow, sorry, I got a little preachy there, but Shay, thank you for keeping my rants in between the guardrails of coherent thought.
And thank you for letting us ask the honest, uncomfortable questions. That's where real change begins.
So, lovely producer, what are we going to talk about in the next episode? Abortion, transgender athletes? Maybe we'll talk about that infamous list.
Let's make sure we don't suck at this before we jump straight into the Christian culture war Shark Tank.
Okay, so wise you are. The force is strong with you. And to everyone listening, thank you for flying with the Disruptive Disciple. Hey, we know you have options when selecting a podcast, and you chose the disruptive, ADHD-riddled, bald guy and the brave woman who decided to marry him. So that was a bold move. So come back for episode 2, press that subscribe button, and hey, we're all in this together now, so let's see where this rudderless ark drifts next.
See you next time.